Hello, this is Sarah here at the RNC in Milwaukee.
And it's Anthony, right next to Sarah. How you doing?
And from here, this is where we saw J.D. Vance giving that speech. And we talked about it in yesterday's episode, saying that he was going to introduce his life story to the nation. And of course, that's what he's kind of famous for, isn't it? His background, his upbringing, the best-selling memoir he wrote all about it, Hillbilly Elegy. And we heard him tonight fleshing it out a wee bit.
Yeah, he obviously led off with his personal story about growing up in the southern part of Ohio, how his family struggled with addiction, how he joined the Marine Corps, how he put himself through college with the GI money that the Marine Corps gave him, how he went to Yale Law School. You know, I also was struck by how he introduced a little bit of like these the foundations of Trumpist ideology on immigration, on trade, and on anti-corporatism and anti-elitism. He really hammered home that the Republican Party and his party is now the party that goes against Wall Street, which might be a bit of a shock to some of the big corporate donors who are sitting up in the luxury boxes above us.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that personal backstory as well. I thought one of the most interesting moments was when the entire crowd started chanting JD's mom, JD's mom, JD's mom, because he introduced her. She was sitting by the Trump family in the VIP box. And of course, it's well known that she was addicted to drugs when he was younger, when he was a child, and he was largely brought up, in fact, by his grandparents as a result. But she's been 10 years clean and sober and was here to proudly watch her son becoming the vice presidential candidate and got a hell of a reception, really.
Yeah, that was a powerful moment. There were also some lighthearted moments where JD exchanged some jabs with the Michigan delegation because J.D. Vance went to Ohio State University and their big rival is the Michigan Wolverines. And at one point, the Michigan delegation was chanting, "Let's go blue," which is the fight cry for the Michigan Wolverines.
And I thought it was interesting the way he was able to take the story of his upbringing from poverty in Kentucky and Ohio through the U.S. Marines and all the way to Yale Law School. And it's not just a boast about the fact that he, pulled himself up by his bootstraps. It's a story, he says, about opportunity in America, the best of the country, and the kind of country that he thinks that he and Donald Trump can rebuild.
Yeah, and he was introduced by his wife, who is a daughter of Indian immigrants who he met at Yale Law School. She was a very powerful corporate lawyer in a San Francisco law firm, a registered Democrat for a while. The law firm itself had kind of progressive values, but she talked about her relationship with JD, told a little bit of the story of how they met, and then talked about his family values. I found that particularly striking when J.D. Vance went on in his speech to talk about the dangers of undocumented migration, about how undocumented migrants were driving up the cost of housing by competing with people who were here for low-cost housing, and also talked about the idea of America as a nation, not of ideas, but of connection to the land, generations of Americans going back. It's kind of American nationalism that you don't really hear a lot about. Everyone talks about the melting pot of America and how America is its ideas and its founding principles, not its people. But he charted a different path on that, one that is a lot more closely aligned with this kind of nationalist movement rather than what you heard from Republicans even just 10 years ago.
And of course, one of the things that J.D. Vance can possibly do for the Trump campaign going forward is act as their attack dog on this kind of stuff, isn't it? Because it remains to be seen whether Donald Trump really is a changed man after the assassination attempt, and if he is, how long that can last for. But he says he's ripped up his convention speech and rewritten it in a theme of national unity. But if he does need somebody to get out there and stick the knife in, J.D. Vance is perfect, isn't he?
Yeah, and that's kind of a traditional role for vice presidential candidates. They let the top of the ticket keep their hands clean and they can go on the attack. And Vance did that on several occasions. He blamed Joe Biden for supporting free trade deals. He blamed Joe Biden for voting for the Iraq War. I will note that Iraq War happened during a Republican president. A lot of those trade deals were supported by a majority of Republicans, but he did try to tie Joe Biden to that, as well as to inflation and to crime and all the other issues that we've heard time and time again for the past couple of days here.
Well, that's an interesting thing that you say, because you're right. A lot of this did happen under different Republican administrations. But I don't think that Trump's Republican Party thinks it's got anything to do with George W. Bush's party. I think they revile the neocons that were in the Bush administration every bit as much as they do Democrats.
Yeah, yeah. And if there's anything I think we can take out of tonight's speech from J.D. Vance, it is that this is where the Republican Party is moving. Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance partially because he is from the Midwest. He can appeal to those Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin voters who are going to be the key swing voters in this election. But also, he supports these kind of Trumpist populist movements. He's a beating heart of the Trump movement, can lay out kind of an ideological framework the way he did today and move the party more decidedly along that path. I'll be curious to see if Trump wins and J.D. Vance is his vice president, whether this really means this is the direction that they're going to go. Because you'll remember when Donald Trump was president, probably his biggest achievement in his first term in office was a corporate tax cut. So, not exactly anti-Wall Street.
Yes, but there's been a change of tone, I would say, from quite a few people within the Trump campaign, hasn't there, about where they stand vis-a-vis Wall Street and big business and corporations. So, but you're right, it'd be very, very interesting indeed. And also, he set himself out up as the heir, do you think, tonight as well?
I think so. He's definitely well positioned. He noted he was only 39 years old, that Joe Biden's been in office longer than he's been alive, which makes me feel kind of old as well. But he positioned himself as the ideological and the political heir of Donald Trump. Now, this is just the introduction, but that's the way he introduced himself. I think it'll be interesting to see how he goes about debating whoever the vice presidential nominee is, with Kamala Harris, how he goes about debating her, and then how he goes about fulfilling his role as vice president if he were to win.
I have to say, moving around the convention the last couple of days, I think this is the happiest, most contented political conference or convention I have ever been at. I mean, people are practically giddy, aren't they? I mean, not just because Donald Trump was able to walk away from that assassination attempt and they can see him here, but also because everything seems to be going their way at the moment. I mean, they're up in the polls, the news is working in their favour, and then, of course, today they found out that the President Joe Biden's got COVID.
So yeah, Biden has COVID, and that wasn't just the only big news from the Democrats today, and the only big news that has Republicans licking their chops, thinking they're going to win. That circular Democratic firing squad that we talked about last night, and that we've been talking about for several weeks now, that's really picking up the pace now. We've heard even more evidence that Democrats, up to the highest level, are dissatisfied with Joe Biden. They want him to stand aside.
Yeah, so Adam Schiff came out and said publicly that it's time to pass the torch because he's worried that Joe Biden can't beat Donald Trump. And he matters because, although he's a congressman at the moment, he's standing for the Senate in California. He's a big, important voice. But also, everybody was picking through his statement, weren't they, looking for any evidence that his close friend Nancy Pelosi might have her fingerprints on it anywhere.
Right. Remember, he was the politician that Nancy Pelosi picked to prosecute the first Trump impeachment trial. They are very tight. She endorsed him. She elevated him to the front runner of the Senate seat that you just mentioned. So it defies imagination to think that Adam Schiff came out and said that Joe Biden should pass the torch to a new generation without, at the very least, giving Nancy Pelosi a heads up. And I know there are reports that Nancy Pelosi's office disavowed that, said no, they didn't really know in advance. I'm not buying that story.
Yeah, and then more reporting started coming out saying that actually Nancy Pelosi has spoken to Joe Biden herself. Again, not confirmed by her or her team, but it's being reported that she had told him that she's terribly worried that he can't beat Donald Trump, that he's going to lose the election, and take down House Representatives at the same time, that he might lose the House of Representatives. And also then you've got Chuck Schumer, Democratic senator, leader of the Democrats in the Senate, apparently also having told Joe Biden that he's going to lose, and he's going to lose some Senate seats at the same time. So, yeah, they'd be looking at a Republican clean sweep there.
Right, and you want another non-denial denial. Chuck Schumer's office came out and said that it was pure conjecture about what the two talked about in private, but that Chuck Schumer relayed how the Democrats in the Senate were feeling. And we know already that many of the Democrats in the Senate are
feeling
really,
like Adam
really
Schiff
nervous.
is feeling.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was this drumbeat of bad news for Joe Biden, signs that rather than fading away after the failed assassination attempt against Donald Trump and getting swamped by the Republican convention, Democrats in the Congress are rallying around the idea and getting more organized to try to push Joe Biden out. And they got another big victory here. I know we've talked about how there was going to be this virtual roll call vote that would make Joe Biden the nominee maybe as early as next week. That has been postponed at least until the beginning of August. So the window for some sort of uprising against Joe Biden just got bigger by a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so let's unpick how significant these interventions are today. So you got the fact that you're just adding to the number of names. 19 Democrats in the Senate and the House, I think, have now said publicly that Joe Biden should step down. But I think we've talked before about it's not necessarily going to be just getting the numbers up and this sense that there's a kind of more and more and more people coming out and telling him to go. That wouldn't necessarily push him aside. In fact, that might get him to dig his heels in a bit more. But we've always said there's a small number of people who matter who we might listen to, and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi were on that list, and it's not a very long list.
And then there was a New York Times report today that said that Joe Biden himself might be more open to stepping aside, not digging his heels in, but maybe softening his stance on considering whether to step aside. So that, I think, was another key tell. He actually said in an interview earlier today that if he had a health issue, that would be a reason why he might step aside. So all of a sudden, there are these little bubbles over his head that give indication that this isn't a done deal, and maybe this hard line that the Democrats had been putting forward and that Joe Biden had been putting forward about staying in office, that's softening a bit.
So what do you think? Is now considerably more likely, a little bit more likely, a teensy bit more likely that he might step aside?
I don't know if I'd say considerably, but it is definitely more likely. If we're looking at the big pendulum I spoke about yesterday, it is now swinging with a lot of momentum towards the Joe Biden heading towards the exits, although it's still what do you do next? I mean, I think that's the big question. If he leaves, how do you set up a system that keeps the party from descending into chaos, that keeps this from becoming a free-for-all where everyone tries to get a piece of power and everyone is disappointed except whoever ends up getting the nomination?
And then, of course, he was out campaigning. He was in Las Vegas. He was planning to give a speech that was appealing to Hispanic voters in Nevada, whom he'd need to win over if he's going to take. That's another key swing state. And he had to cancel his speech because he's just been diagnosed with COVID. I mean, he cannot catch a break at the moment, can he? And we saw him looking really frail, moving very, very slowly up the steps to Air Force One to get on the plane to fly back to Delaware. And I just thought, if this campaign is about strength versus weakness as a kind of subtle background theme, Donald Trump's here, triumphant, having been shot at and walked away, and Joe Biden is practically limping onto his plane, having caught COVID and had to suspend his campaign. I mean, as a split-screen moment, it doesn't look good for Democrats.
Suspending his campaign at a pivotal moment where he's fighting for his political life. He's beset by enemies within his own party. What he needs to be doing is getting out there and showing he still has the energy, still has the vitality, still has the endurance to be able to beat Donald Trump. The image of him getting on the plane, it just so slowly, so carefully, he hasn't looked more frail, I think. And, Donald Trump got COVID. Donald Trump was whisked away by helicopter to Walter Reed Hospital back in October 4 years ago. So in some ways, I mean, this is the flip side of that, but it is still really bad timing for Joe Biden, and it could make a difficult situation for him all the more worse.
And there was a poll I saw today that I thought undercut one of his arguments as well, which said 2/3 of Democrats want him to step aside. And of course, he's been arguing that the voters want him, that 14 million Democrats voted for him in the primaries, that they want him to stick it out and he's going to do it for them. It's just the elites trying to push him aside. Well, Not if 2/3 of people who identify as Democrats say they want rid of him.
Yeah, that's got to sting. Although, to be honest, polls came out today that showed the race still a dead heat. 1% separation between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and I think it was the Economist YouGov poll, and other ones show similar within the margin of error. So again, and I pointed this out last night, despite all of this, despite all of the great news for Donald Trump and all the really bad news for Joe Biden, we are still in a race that is really, really tight.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, so 3 days down, 1 to go, and tomorrow night is the big deal, the big show. Donald Trump himself taking the stage and delivering what is going to be billed as a lengthy, maybe 90-minute acceptance speech.
You're joking.
No, get ready. It sounds like one of his operas said, get yourself comfortable, sit down, because it is going to be a long speech.
Oh, I did not know that. That means it'll be really, really late when we record tomorrow's Americast.
I know, not fair, is it? They don't have journalists in mind when they plan these things.
It'll be amazing, though, won't it? I mean, the atmosphere was absolutely electric when on Monday night he walked in for the first time and everybody could see him for the first time since the shooting. But yeah, I think the reception he's going to get tomorrow night is going to be off the charts, like nothing we've seen at a convention like this before, I imagine.
Because they haven't heard him speak yet. He hasn't spoken yet. He's come into this arena 3 days in a row now, waved, pumped his fist, and then sat down and silently watched the proceedings. So now they get to hear his voice. Although I'm curious, because they're talking about this new tone, they're going to call for unity. Teleprompter Donald Trump, the uniting Donald Trump, never comes across, at least in my view, as well as unscripted, fighting, belligerent. You rile him up with all of the red meat that he throws to his supporters, Donald Trump. So if he gets up there and in his kind of sing-song voice calls for unity, will he have the same energy behind it? Will he be able to pump up the crowd? Will it be a speech where at the end of it we say, wow, Donald Trump really is in command and painted a bold vision for what he wants to do for his second term?
And Melania's going to be here?
Melania, the reports are Melania is going to be here as well as Ivanka.
I'm very good of her to drop in.
Yeah, we haven't. We've seen Donald Jr. and Donald Jr.'s eldest daughter, 17-year-old Kai Trump, who came on and spoke with him for a little bit today. We've seen other members of Donald Trump's family. We've seen Laura Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, give a speech last night. But yeah, Ivanka, who was all over the place 8 years ago, a member of Donald Trump's White House, and of course Melania, who gave a speech 8 years ago here, who gave a speech at the convention, the virtual convention 4 years ago, and was on the campaign trail for Donald Trump in both of those races, has been invisible here. We'll see what, if she says anything, we'll see what her demeanor is, I suppose, because that could be kind of telling too.
Yeah, and it'll be the first time we've seen them together since the assassination attempt as well.
Yeah, she wasn't there for his trial. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how absent she's been. So a lot of eyes will be not on Donald Trump on stage, but on Melania in the box.